Today, we got a wonderful session planned for you. We're going to be talking about the advanced workflow, advanced notifications for WIN-911. Now, this does require the advanced license, which includes the ability to send push reports. Push reports is a way of automating a report to be sent out to people at a certain time or whatever time you want. And then also, it utilizes roles and labels, which we'll be talking about today. Now, I don't mind asking questions during the session. I'll be keeping the questions box open, so if you have a question regarding anything, just let me know. All right, so to break down WIN-911, it's really just three simple pieces. You have your contacts, who are the people that are going to be called. The escalations is the notification policies. That's who's going to be called in what order. And then the alarms that you want WIN-911 to send notifications for. You can import them or create subscriptions. And in the end, you get your WIN-911 notifications. To begin, we should talk about contacts directory. So this is where you create your users. And to really utilize the advanced workflow, it helps to have roles and labels. Roles is a way of grouping people together. So you can create your own custom role and assign that role to people, and then use that as your call out list. And if you need to make changes on the fly, you could always use Operator Workspace and change the role for one user to another, or add someone. Perhaps they're not going to be on shift for the week, so you could always just remove their role. Our next step is our labels. So with labels is a way of grouping alarms together. And we can use descriptions, or we can do imported tags. In this example, I have imported tags, each with their own label. And we can see right here that when we expand this little arrow, we can set the notification policy. And that's how the whole system really comes together, is an alarm triggers a notification policy, and your notification policy contains your contacts, your users. And before we get into the actual how alarm notifications work, we need to talk about the life cycles a bit. We need to know the difference between an initial event and an alarm state change. And so every time an alarm trips for the first time, it'll always come in as active, unacknowledged, and that is always the initial event. So here we have two choices. The alarm can become inactive, and that's considered an alarm state change. And the only way you're going to see that is if you have that notification box selected, or if you have re-notify on state change enabled. The other option is that it can become acknowledged. And in a perfect world, that's how it works. When WIN-911 sends out a notification, operator receives that remote notification, acknowledges it, so it changes its alarm state to an active acknowledged alarm. And then the operator clears it and becomes inactive and completes its life cycle and becomes a terminal alarm at this point, inactive, acknowledged. And if that alarm were to trip again, it starts its initial event all over again. Now we do have options in place. So let's say the alarm does become inactive without being acknowledged. You can always tell WIN-911 to automatically acknowledge those alarms for you so they complete their life cycle, become terminal, and then if that alarm trips again, it starts the process all over again. So just one thing to really point out is there's two ways to really see these options. One is you have re-notify on state change enabled, or if you're using a basic notification, you would have this box selected. Are these boxes selected to see those notifications? All right, so here's a quick look at our advanced notifications. Now in this view, I am consolidating the icons here. So this would be the contacts directory, the people icon, notification policies. And then we go to the top here, select our advanced to see our advanced options. And we can use our create button down here at the bottom to create a new one. And when it comes to advanced, you basically always need a start policy. This is how you're going to start your call flow. And then you need a stop policy. What do you want to do when the alarm becomes terminal, or do you want to stop the policy when the alarm's acknowledged? Things of that nature. And then you can have everything in between. Your alarm state changes. Perhaps you want to automatically acknowledge when it returns to normal. You could even have it call other call groups if you'd like. So in this next picture, this is an example of a full policy. I think it's a pretty solid policy. So if we were to start when the alarms first receive the initial event, we start our advanced workflow. If any alarm state change occurs, we're going to notify previous. If the alarm becomes inactive, we're going to acknowledge it. And if the alarm becomes, if the alarm becomes inactive, we're going to acknowledge it. And if the alarm becomes acknowledged, then we're going to stop that policy. And then just in case, if no one's acknowledged the alarm, we're going to set up a 30-minute upon timer to restart the call flow to send out notifications again if needed. And so with these, we can always create new rules if we want, and we can create actions. We can have as many as there as we want. Just keep in mind that you always need a start when the alarm is first received, and you always need a stop policy. All right, and so this is how we get started. We would click our create button, and then for when the alarm is first received, we have the option to hit the plus sign to create a new one. That's when this box pops up. And we can create a workflow, which is going to be an advanced flow chart, or we can still create a basic call out list if we like. And then we use the little pencil here to edit that if we want. And then if we've already got workflows created, we can use the browse button here to browse for those workflows instead of creating a new one. All right, and so this is a look at the advanced workflow. And here we can create a name. It's kind of hidden up here at the top, but this is what we name our workflow. And then we can drag and drop things into here. We would just basically hold and drag into where we want, whether we want to notify people. We add actions and decisions. And so here's where we can look at those actions and decisions. We can hover the mouse over them to see a label to see what it's going to do for us. And probably the big ones that I see used the most is whether or not the alarm's acknowledged. You could have that as your very first step. If the alarm is acknowledged, then you could just tell it to end and you don't want to call it anyone. If it's not acknowledged, it'll follow the path for the call flow. We can also set up labels. So this is where we can utilize the alarm groupings with labels and check a label to see if it matches that for that alarm, and then send it out to a role, a group of people. And time span could be useful. The most common use case for that one is perhaps you don't actually want any alarms sending out notifications during the day, you only want it at night. And so we could set up a time span that says we only want the alarms to go out if it meets a certain time. All right, and in the end, this is a good example of how we can utilize the acknowledgement option. If it is acknowledged, it'll just go to the end statement. If it's not, we will start checking our labels for which alarm groups they are. And if the alarm group matches this label, we'll go down and contact whoever's on call. And if no one's acknowledged the alarm, then we will notify all our operators. If it doesn't match this label, then we'll move on to check the next alarm grouping. And if it matches this one, we can still go to on call. We can go to a different role if we want. And in the end here, I'm going to a different role. So this is basically a solid escalation that's going to contact on call first. And if on call is not available, then it will go to their respective groups. And then we have push reports. So push report is a way of automating a report. This is where you would assign some sort of bit that would toggle at a certain time every day. When that bit triggers, we see it come into WIN-911 as an alarm, but it's not technically an alarm. And we tell that alarm to trigger this advanced workflow that's basically just pushing out a report to someone. So you could have that turn on maybe every hour, every 30 minutes to push those reports to people if you'd like. And we would utilize the push report option here. And then operator workspace, this is where we can quickly change the roles if we want. Operator workspace is a way of configuring the policies or the users without having to open up the entire WIN-911 workspace. And you can create a button on your HMI to launch it from your HMI. That way it's full screen and the operators can quickly change who's on call or put themselves on schedule if they like or change their schedule. All right, so let's get into the demo. Okay. And this is a look at our directory. So here we can go to our directory. We can quickly assign roles to people if we like. We have a couple of default roles already, but you're welcome to create your own custom role. And each one of these is a different connection. So maybe I don't want anything going to my phone right now. And so I could take myself out of those roles. I just want it going to my email or my mobile device. If I do plan on being on call and I'm going to be at home that day, I could always change my role to quickly add myself to that so I get that call. And then in roles is here where we can create our own roles. We get our own plus sign here. We can change the font color and change the background color. So this is what can give us our own roles if we want. And then notification policies. So you're probably already familiar with the basic. So this is the basic that basically combined like strategies and tactics, who gets called in what order, what type of messages do you want to receive, and if you want to re-notify or automatically acknowledge. And then we can go to our advanced. So with our advanced, I'll go ahead and just show you my example here from the slide. So here we have when the alarm is first received. What do we want to do? We can come over here and edit that action. We can browse for other options that I've created, or go ahead and create a new with our plus sign here. And then just keep in mind that the pencil is always edit, plus is always new, dashes are always browse. And you can continue adding actions under the rule. So we consider this the rule, and then we have our actions underneath it. And we can add actions, remove actions if you like. When we go to our alarm state change, I mean, if we don't want to be notified on that, we could just delete that out if you'd like. Or if we want to automatically acknowledge, we could tell it to automatically acknowledge when returned to normal. And then if we want to stop the policy when the alarm becomes acknowledged, that's probably the most common, because most people, when they do voice calls, they get a call, someone acknowledges the alarm, and they probably don't want it calling back everyone else. So usually that's a good solid stop policy. But you're more than welcome to use the WIN terminal. And so if someone acknowledged the alarm, it would still process the policy because it's waiting for the alarm to go terminal, which is an alarm that's been acknowledged and returned to normal. So probably one of the most common is when the alarm becomes acknowledged, stop that policy. And then we probably need some sort of escalation just in case no one's acknowledged it. And so we could say upon repeating timer, restart the call list and go from there. All right, so let's go back to our initial event here. And so if we wanted to create a new one, I could go ahead and just hit my plus sign. I get a choice, create new workflow or create the basic. As we go ahead and create a new workflow, this is when we see the flowchart build. And so it's just a matter of deciding what decisions you want. The one that I thought was useful too is the time span one. If the alarm comes in during the day or from whenever it came in. And I apologize, actually we're going to use the schedule one. Time span is actually for how long the alarm has been active. So with our schedule, this would check whether or not what schedule we want. Do we want alarms only coming in between certain times of the day, or I'm sorry, not so much alarms coming in, but notifications being sent out. And so this is, I see, real popular where during the day, again, they don't really want the remote notifications going, but as soon as nighttime hits, they want those alarms going out. The other common one is checking just right off the bat if the alarm is acknowledged. And then we can decide to make our decision from there if we want. And this is how I actually built my example for the slide. And so if the alarm is not acknowledged, we can drag in our labels. And so this what would happen is the alarm would check if it has that label. Now, before we get too far into that, let me go back to the alarms real quick, to the alarm source, to show you how the labels work. So this is an example of where I'm using imported tags from InTouch. I've assigned my labels to those tags. And so if this alarm were to trip, it would know that it's this label, and that's how it's checking the label in the advanced workflow. We can also do a label with our subscription. Now keep in mind, whenever we have the option for both import tags and subscriptions, the way it's going to work is that when the alarm trips, it'll always check the tags in the tag list first. And if it matches any of these tag names, then it's going to utilize whatever policy we have set for that. If it doesn't match anything here, then it will move on and check my subscriptions. And in this case, this is kind of like a catch-all letting me know other alarms that might trip that aren't in my imported list. Now I could do something like add both wastewater and water to this one, and any alarm that comes in is gonna meet that criteria based on the label. And real quick, just like with roles, we can create our own custom labels if we like. Pick the color for the font in the background. All right, so back into the notification policies. So here I was just messing around creating a new one. And so now we kind of see with the labels grouping alarms together, that's where we can choose these decisions to say check the label. And if it matches one of those labels, then follow this path of green. And from there we can drag in our notify all. And this is the one, because a notify by itself is just a single person. A notify all is where you can utilize the groups. There's a couple ways. You can either do multiple if you like. I don't know if you can actually do multiple, so let's check that real quick. Nope, just one role at a time. So we could sell it to go to on call first. If it doesn't match that label, we can move on. And I've actually seen some people utilize this in a way to where they have just one gigantic flowchart and they have probably like 15 different label checks, and each label is going to a different call group of people. So let's go back to, if it doesn't match this label, then we need another decision block in here. What are we going to do next? And so we could keep adding and keep adding and keep telling it to call people. Okay. And then we have a lot of options here as well with the rules. And so you create a rule, and then with each rule, you create an action. Now, where it can get kind of confusing, let me just start from scratch real quick. I'm going to go ahead and create a new one because it can get kind of tricky when you're trying to set your stop policy. So if I go ahead and create a new one, it's going to show me right off the bat, the three main ones: initial events, alarm state changes, and stopping the policy. And so here, maybe I want to add a new rule, and I want to set it to become automatically acknowledged when it returns to normal. So I can pick this here and come to my edit here and actually change what to do here, stop the policy. Now, if I was playing around with this one and somehow I messed it up, it's probably not going to let me do it. So let's say I go to when acknowledged, and I'll go ahead and edit, and I change this to something else. Suddenly, it switches this one to be grayed out. So just keep in mind, you always need some stop policy somewhere. And it can get kind of tricky when the things are graying out. If you see this little grayed out situation, it means we can't change that one because it's trying to use that as the stop policy. And you're always going to need a stop policy. Now with the push report, we'll go ahead and demo a little situation with the push report here so you can just see what that looks like. I don't have a way to actually automate my tags, so I'm just going to pretend and hit my tag that would push my report, so bear with me just a minute. So this would be maybe a tag that simulates our triggers once every hour. And so what happens is WIN-911 will have that tag and it will have it pointing to a notification policy. And that's all it's going to do is just run that report. And I can show you a little quick example of what that looks like. So normally, basically a report is just showing you the values of tags that necessarily aren't an alarm. So it's a good way of monitoring water levels and gas levels and things of that nature. And the way this works, it's just like any other alarm that trips. We would have it imported into WIN-911 as a tag. And I'm telling it basically to start my, that's the right one. I'm telling my report button to basically start this notification policy called push report. And if we follow that, go to notification policies, all it's doing is telling it to send a report out. And inside here is where I can configure it, which reports do I want to use, and then who wants to be part of that push report. And we could even use a label, or sorry, a role in this situation too. Maybe I need it to go to all the managers. So anyone with the role manager will get that report. And then we could always use the operator workspace to quickly change that. So if we go back to my HMI, hit my operator workspace, go to my connections, and I can start adding managers to people. Let me go ahead and just include myself here. Okay. Now with operator workspace, one thing to note, if you ever see the star up here, that means you got unsaved changes. So we're going to have to save those. Okay. The big takeaway, in my opinion, from this lesson or this session is that an alarm is always going to trigger a notification policy, regardless if it's basic or advanced. And in the end, that's really how the whole system works, is that when the alarm trips, it triggers that notification policy, and that policy is what dictates who gets called or who gets an email or who gets a report. It's also about the policies of the notification. What do you want to do when it becomes acknowledged, or how do you want to stop calling people, or do you want to re-notify people based on certain conditions? And so I'm going to get back to the slides and just kind of mention what we support, what SCADAs we do support. And we have included InTouch 2014 with support for WIN-911 2021 R2. If you somehow got the R1 release, it's not going to work with 2014, so you'll want to make sure you upgrade or at least install the WIN-911 2021 R2. We do have previous versions of WIN-911. If you do need support for some of the older SCADAs, we can still support that with previous versions. And those previous versions are available for download on our website under the support tab and the software download section. And then as far as OS support, right now we are only doing Windows Server 2016, 2019. The installer right now will install on Windows Server 2022, although we don't technically support it yet, but it is being tested and should be available in support soon. The same is true with Windows Desktop 11. The latest version of WIN-911 will let you install on Windows 11, but we don't officially support it yet. But you're more than welcome to try it if you like. So far, QA is testing well with that one as well. So far, so good. Well, thank you all for joining. Really do appreciate you taking the time and watching our sessions. We appreciate your interest in WIN-911. I will point out real quick that we do have a feedback option on our website. Send feedback, and you can put in your own suggestions. And then once it's submitted, it becomes available for everyone to review. And the more votes it gets, the more likely we are to add it to our next release. Okay, everyone. Well, thanks again. You have a great day.